so much for coming out this evening. We really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedules to be with us to celebrate Japanese art. My name is Yoshi Domoto. I'm the Executive Director of the Japan American Society of Georgia, and so thrilled to have so many people with us this evening. For all of our members in attendance, thank you so much for your continued support. And for those of you here for your first JASG event, welcome and yokoso. Hope you enjoyed tonight's program and really get to know us a little bit more and come out to more and more events that we offer throughout the year. But with our mission to promote the mutual understanding between the people of Japan and Georgia, tonight's program about Japanese art will hopefully enable you to better appreciate both Japanese art and the impact it has had, not only on Western art, but also popular culture, and also global technology, which you'll learn about a little bit about tonight too. But tonight's event is part of the National Association of Japan American Societies, or NAJAS, Art History, Art Feature, Digital Replicas of Japanese Traditional Art Series. Say that 5 times really quickly, right? But these programs are done throughout the entire country at different Japan American societies, and it really highlights the very important aspect of U.S.-Japan relations, which is art exchange, right? So, but we really appreciate NAJAS's generous support of making this program happen this evening, and also funding from the U.S.-Japan Foundation as well. To begin our evening, it is my pleasure and my distinct honor to introduce you the Consul General of Japan here in Atlanta, the Honorable Mr. Mio Maeda.
Well, thank you very much. And, my name is Mio Maeda. I'm a Consul General of Japan in Atlanta. And first of all, thank you so much for organizing this great event, Yoshi-san and the JASG. I appreciate it, and you're kind of the core of the Japan-Georgia relationships. So I really appreciate your endeavors. And also thank you so much for attending this event tonight. I can say that Japan and the U.S. has a very good relationship between the two countries for a long time. And at this moment, there is a small fluctuations between the Japan-U.S. relations, but I'm sure that in particular the relations at the grassroots level is very, very steady and very profound. And so we really appreciate your attendance and the organization of this event. And in particular, this, as I mentioned, there is a kind of small issues in terms of the economic relations between Japan and the United States. But I can say that at the cultural exchange level, our relations is superb. And this project is one of the good example to show the strong relationship between the two countries. So I really appreciate, and I'm glad to be here to see how the relations, the collaboration is ongoing. So, and with that, once again, I'd like to express my sincere gratitude to the JASG and the participants, all the participants present here, and so thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to listening to the lecture tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Consul General. And now it's my pleasure and honor to introduce a friend from all the way from Washington, D.C., the president of the National Association of Japan American Societies, Mr. Andrew Wagala.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much, Yoshi, Mr. Consul General. I know I'm at the opening end and you just applauded, but I would actually indulge me here. One more round of applause, and then I'll tell you why you're applauding. You just applauded for Mr. Yoshitomoto and the Japan-American Society of Georgia for having put on this evening's program, which we're getting ready to enjoy, and also really have been the pioneers in this whole series. Atlanta has been the bookend of a new program that we just started 2 years ago, the Art History, Art Future program, which Yoshi mentioned. So I was here a year and a half ago, and that was the first time we had an exhibit with a curator from the Met talking about a Japanese screen, and at that time there was another Japanese event, samurai weaponry exhibit up at the time. So it's wonderful, and we are really grateful for the role that this society has played in an important new series. So thank you again to the whole team at Japan-American Society, Georgia. This series is really neat because it, I think, exhibits something quintessentially Japanese, which is to use really high tech in a cutting-edge way to accentuate something very, very old and traditional and make the best of it. So Kyoto master experts have found the way to partner with masterful technology from Canon imagery, for example. So they're able to make, the very closest to the original, and they make that accessible to hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people through the magic of this Tsuzuri project, which is the subject of the artworks that we used in this 8 presentations that were made over a period of two years. And it was really interesting the way the series played out in all of the different venues where we went, 6 different cities around the US. We learned about the artworks, the artists, and their periods, their times. We got introduced to the technology behind the Tsuzuri project, these incredibly faithful replicas that you're going to be hearing and learning more about. But we also got drawn into some really interesting social, cultural, kind of political discussions about what is the proper place of art, where does it belong, what should be repatriated, how and what can be shared popularly. So there are a lot of interesting other second and third order discussions about national patrimony and the role of copies, if you will, in society. So I mentioned that tonight closes the series of 2 years, and unfortunately it also closes, for now, the program. This has been brought to you by, in part by NAJAS, but also a private foundation known as the US-Japan Foundation. And they generously supported the 8 programs that we have and decided they're going to move on to another area. So our role is to keep this program going, and the turnout tonight suggests there's really strong interest in the program. If there are any ideas or thoughts about where we can head to keep this program alive, let me know in the future. But that's truly our homework. That's what this organization, it's now so heavy it's getting crinkly. We just added our 40th member just a couple weeks ago at Phoenix, Arizona. But our role in Washington is to try to support all of these lovely societies by bundling grants, if you will, into programs that we can then compete out. So societies like this one can rightfully receive and enjoy. So that's our work in Washington, is to support the network. I'm also excited about, in this finale, an innovation in the series. In the first 7 talks, we heard from art curators, and we were really eager to delve more into the preservation side of the story as well, and a little bit more of the technological aspect. And Yoshi shared that interest, and we've been working to do that, but we weren't able quite to pull it together until tonight. So instead of hearing from a renowned art curator, you'll hear from a renowned art conservator in the person of Sarah Ribbons, who is the conservator of Asian paintings at the Cleveland Museum of Art, the CMA. At the CMA, she concentrates on Japanese and Korean paintings. And while she examines, treats, and conducts research on the entire collection of Korean and Japanese artwork that the museum has, her focus is on the treatment of Japanese paintings, Buddhist paintings on silk. So it'll be interesting to hear about some of the materials and the differences between paper and silk. She was an apprentice at Tominaga Beizando in Kumamoto, Japan, before becoming a conservator at Usami Shokakudo Company in Kyoto, Japan. She holds a Master of Art Conservation degree, concentrating on paper conservation from Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario, and a BFA, and has a Bachelor of Fine Arts from York University in Toronto. And we're delighted, Sarah, that you made time and could be with us. And please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I tend to speak quietly, so can everybody hear me? Okay, good. Thank you so much for inviting me here, especially Yoshi and the Japan America Society of Georgia for putting this all together. I do want to say that my allergies have welcomed in spring with a bang, so if I have to pause more frequently, I apologize for that. And also, just that public speaking is not one of my comfort zones. So I thought as a conservator, I would be hiding behind the scenes, enjoying the artwork, but it turns out that people are interested in what I do, and so more and more I am out here speaking to people. So if I start talking really quickly, please hold up your hands and tell me to slow down and breathe. As there is so much I could cover, going well beyond the paintings themselves, I'm going to focus in on one painting format, the folding screen. Through this talk, I hope to introduce a bit about the history of folding screens, the materials used in their creation, the methods of deterioration, how Japanese paintings conservators train to care for these materials, and finish with how this relates to the Tsuzuri project from a conservation perspective. From what we know, folding screens originated in China in the 3rd century CE and are one of the oldest forms of furniture. This painting is a Southern Song copy of a painting from the 4th century and depicts a type of decorated folding screen. Images of folding screens have also been found in tomb paintings from the Han Dynasty, which was in power from the 1st to 3rd centuries CE. The format was transmitted to Japan in the 8th century. The Japanese took the folding screen and very much made it distinctly their own. Originally, screens were either single panels on wooden feet called suitate, such as this example from the Cleveland Museum of Art's collection, or multiple panels ranging from 2 to 8, joined together by leather thongs or cords. Each panel was surrounded by borders, like this example from the CMA's collection, depicting scenes from Essays in Idleness. This may have been to accommodate the thong or cords joining the panels together. Even when the painting was continuous across multiple panels, there were still narrow borders separating each panel. And this can be seen in the landscape screen from the Kyoto National Museum, which is thought to be the oldest extant folding screen and dates from the 11th century. It was in the 14th century that the current paper hinges were developed, allowing the paintings to seamlessly span all panels and eliminating the use of border silks between panels. Soon after this, the most recognized format of a pair of 6-panel folding screens emerged. Folding screens were very much a part of everyday life in Japan. The very word for folding screen in Japanese, byobu, translates as wind wall, indicating their functional aspect. While they were beautiful works of art that could add symbolic meaning to special occasions and ceremonies, they were also very functional. Folding screens were used to divide rooms into smaller spaces, provide privacy, or block drafts, as the name implies. They could also be easily folded up and moved or stored due to their lightweight nature. Folding screen could be fully unfolded or partly unfolded, depending on the space or requirements. And they could even be unfolded in such a way as to entirely surround a person. The folds of the screen format create a three-dimensionality to the paintings that artists took advantage of in their own compositions. As parts of the screen physically come towards you or move away from you, the painted image can emphasize this to more dramatic effect. This quick video shows you just how the painting changes as you view it from different angles. Parts of the painting are hidden or revealed by the folds of the panels, creating multiple compositions depending on the angle of view. You can watch as the herons appear and disappear as you move around the screen. Folding screens were such a normal part of Japanese life that they even appear in the most fantastical of paintings, such as this skeleton screen in an illustrated marriage of apparitions from the Edo period. Japanese artists painted on either paper or silk supports, and while folding screen paintings are most commonly on paper, examples on silk do exist. Paper makers couldn't make a paper large enough to use a single sheet for each panel, so several sheets are joined together before the paint is applied. And you can just about see the join between two sheets on this image to the left here. There are several types of paper that have been used for paintings, depending on the style and format, but some of those are shown here, ranging from thick, smooth Torinoko paper made from Gampi and Mitsumata fibers, used for screens and panels, to an extremely thin and glossy Gampi paper. And finally, the most common used paper for a range of paintings was soft white shen paper. Soft white shen paper, which originates in China, but due to trade, was used frequently by Japanese artists as well, who call it gasenshi, which translates as master painter paper. Painting silk is an unpatterned plain weave silk that has not been degummed, a process of removing the silk gum from silk used as textiles. This means that painting silk is somewhat stiff and matte in comparison to what you might think of as silk. The weave of the silk can vary with a range of thread counts and thread thicknesses, and the magnified image shown here on the left is a silk used for a Buddhist painting of the 14th century, and you can just about see the gaps between the threads. Traditional Japanese paintings mainly used mineral pigments, such as azurite, malachite, cinnabar, sometimes called vermilion, lead white, and red lead, as well as earth pigments such as red and yellow ochre. Lead white was later replaced with gofen, a pigment made from the shells of oysters. Sorry. Organic pigments can also be found, such as indigo and gamboge, although they are harder to determine as those pigments are fugitive and have often faded. The most common medium for Japanese paintings is ink, called sumi in Japanese, which is made from the soot from burning different woods and oils. All of these pigments, as well as the soot for ink, are bound with animal glue. Animal glue is a form of gelatin and comes in a variety of sources and in several forms. Here are just a few examples that can be used by artists these days. Gelatin from cows is the most commonly used animal glue these days, although historical documents mention the use of deer. And scholars in Japan have been working on creating a deer gelatin for use in conservation. For certain mineral pigments, such as malachite and azurite, the coarser the grind, the deeper the color. In order to work with this pigment, a finer particle size was used for a base coat, and then the pigment was layered up until the final layers are done with the coarsest particles. This was to create a depth of color as well as ensure the adhesion of the pigment to the support. An abrasion has revealed those layers in the painting to the right, where you can see that very light base coat, a mid-tone, and then finally a dark layer on top. All these materials can be applied in a great variety of ways, from pure ink paintings, such as this dragon screen by Sessan Shuke, to ink paintings with thin applications of color, such as this Chinese landscape from the Muromachi period that has faint blue hills, light red buildings, and wispy gold clouds. And finally, to brilliant paintings of glittering gold and rich colors, such as this screen of peacocks and bamboo, attributed to Tosa Mitsuyoshi, with its gilded background and rich, deep blues and greens. In fact, pigment application is an aspect of folding screen paintings that differs from other Japanese painting formats. Due to the flat nature of folding screens, they won't be rolled for storage, such as scrolls. The paint can be applied in thick, almost three-dimensional layers. This is most often done using gofun, which is composed of calcium carbonate and is similar to the gesso used in Western paintings. This technique is called moriage, meaning to heap up or pile up pigment. Moriage is most often used to provide definition to the gilded clouds separating scenes in a folding screen, such as been done on this illustrative screen to dramatic effect. As mentioned earlier, the greens and blues are often also thickly applied in built-up layers to create the rich, deep colors you see in Japanese paintings. Meadow leaf is also commonly found on folding screen paintings, with entire backgrounds of paintings being gilded. This is a beautiful example of cut squares of gold and silver leaf of varying sizes found on our recently acquired pair of folding screens by Watanabe Shiko. In order to make folding screens as lightweight and portable as possible, the interiors are not solid. Instead, they are wooden lattices made from Japanese cedar. This wood is strong, lightweight, and has a very straight, tight grain that reduces the risks of warping. It is also resistant to rot and insect damage, making it an ideal wood for use. The lattices are interwoven, creating more structural stability, and the corners can be joined in a number of different ways, depending on the time period or the quality of the lattice. The wooden lattice is then covered in up to 9 layers of paper, with each layer applied in a slightly different way, in order to create a strong, stable support for the paintings. The layers are applied to both sides of the lattice at the same time in order to keep the lattice from warping. And the last layers are applied in such a way as to make it easy to remove the painting from the panel at a later date when it may require conservation. Here are some of those layers being applied to a very large panel constructed at the CMA. This structure is the same for all forms of Japanese panels, including sliding doors and even painted wall alcoves in traditional homes. In this case, I was building a drying board for conservation of paintings. Before the paintings are applied, the panels are hinged together with paper, often a single layer that is then covered with decorative papers front and back. So here's a mock-up of the hinging process to show you how the hinges of a folding screen are attached. I use these panels for puncture repair to other conservators, so please don't judge me on the final product. While the hinges can be folded both ways, it is not recommended. Much like folding a sheet of paper back and forth makes it easier to tear, the same action applies to folding a screen back and forth. While Japanese paper is extremely strong, this is obviously a weak point in the screen structure if the screens are handled improperly. If you lift one panel, then all of the weight from the adjacent panel is transmitted to the hinges. I've seen some instances actually where a folding screen was mounted to a wall by the outer panels alone, hanging the 4 inner panels by the weight of the 4 inner panels just from the hinges alone. Not the best way of displaying a screen. Once the panels are papered and joined, the paintings are attached to the front while the screen is upright. As the standard folding screen is a little over 5 feet tall, this means that treating a folding screen solo is very difficult. With 2 people, one holding the top of the painting and one holding the bottom of the painting, it becomes easier to apply to the panels. Decorative papers are attached to the backs immediately after the paintings have been attached, once again to counteract any warping of the panels. And finally, decorative borders are attached around the edges while the panels are flat in order to make sure that the pattern aligns. Decorative frames are attached to the outer edges of the panels as added protection. They are made of wood and most often lacquered. They can be nailed to the panels, or the wooden lattice and frame can be constructed together in order for them to be joined without needing any nails. And finally, decorative metal fittings are attached to the sides and corners to protect the frame. These are a copper alloy that has often been gold-plated when new, but they tarnish and become abraded as they age. So new metal fittings can actually be purchased in a range of different finishes, as can be seen from this catalog page. Understanding the structure of aging paintings can help us determine deterioration. Deterioration in Asian painting formats can be physical, chemical, or sometimes biological, such as mold. Physical and chemical damages are more frequent in East Asian paintings due to the nature of the materials and the physicality of their use. Scrolls are designed to be rolled and unrolled, therefore damage can often happen from improper handling. Folding screens are intended to be folded up, moved, and stored, making accidents more common. While our collections photographers take beautiful photographs of the artwork and our lighting specialists make them look beautiful in the galleries, conservators look at artwork in a slightly different light. So while curators view the painting for stylistic qualities and are sometimes confused when we say it's in poor condition, this is what we look at. So this is the same piece in raking light. And you can see that there are a lot of issues that were not at first apparent. We can start to look at all of these conditions, list them, and determine what needs to be done. Splits and tears in panels are often the result of water damage in the past. The materials expand when wet and contract as they dry, but the paintings and decorative silks are attached to those wooden lattice cores, and so they can only shrink so much before they tear to relieve tension, which you can see here. As the formats are laminate structures, delamination is a common issue as those layers start to come apart. Wheat starch paste is the common adhesive, and as it ages, it weakens. Unlike modern glues that like to cross-link, become hard and brittle, or even impossible to remove, the paste used for Asian paintings is reversible, weakening over time and making it easier to treat. Delamination in folding screens often happens between the painting and the first lining. When this happens, it often occurs at the edges of flosses or along old splits, such as you can see here. Although sometimes it happens in areas of the painting that are undamaged, creating small bubbles that are even harder to treat. And sometimes it's accompanied by fresh loss. So here's an area of a painting that had suffered some loss in the past, which had been in-painted, as you can see here. Here and here. But this section of loss has not been in-painted except for a small spot, indicating that this is newer, most likely having occurred since the last time this painting was treated. The pigment can be damaged chemically or physically. The binder often dries out over time, causing the adhesion to weaken, leading to flaking, especially with thick paint applications, as you can see here with heavy applications of Gulfin. The pigments can also darken or fade due to light exposure or in the presence of certain chemicals, such as lead white turning black in the presence of sulfur compounds. Sorry. I've lost the mouse. Hang on a second. So sorry. Haha. Pigments with large particles such as azurite and malachite can become powdery as the binder weakens and fall off. Pigment can also be lost due to abrasion of the surface. So here's another example of pigment flaking with accompanying loss. This is very often found in the greens and whites where the pigment has been applied more thickly, and the pigment surrounding these losses is also frequently unstable. Flaking pigment is an ongoing condition, so if the pigment has to be checked frequently. If it isn't properly stabilized before undergoing treatment, then it can flake, shift, and become adhered to other areas of the painting, as has happened here during a previous treatment before this painting came into the CMA's collection. You can see the paint floating away. Many of the materials used for Asian paintings and mountings are attractive to insects, and therefore insect damage is commonly seen. This can be surface loss to full loss of the painting support due to insect grazing, as can be seen here, where insects have burrowed through all the layers of these suture scrolls. But it can also be small black-brown dots scattered over the surface that we like to politely term insect frass, but is, as you can probably guess, insect droppings. All formats of Asian paintings have suffered from insect damage in the past. Punctures occasionally happen to scrolls, but they are much more common in panel formats. They typically have a distinctive V shape that is different from splits and tears. While they most often happen to the outer panels of a folding screen, the most vulnerable panels when the screen is being moved or shipped, they can happen at any point in a screen, especially if it's been used as furniture. While incredibly strong when new, most of the structure is merely hollow cavities covered in paper, and that paper becomes brittle over time. In addition to the punctures, there can be attempts at conservation or repair using materials that are not necessarily the best, such as the paper conservator's nemesis, sticky tape. While these attempts are well-meaning, they do create additional problems when it comes time for conservation. Hinges are a very vulnerable point on a folding screen. As mentioned previously, they are often a single layer of paper covered with decorative papers. If the screen isn't handled properly, then much of the weight is transferred to the hinge papers. While they are flexible, they are also delicate, meaning that while they can fold both directions and panels can be made to sit flat, these actions are actually strain the hinges, and over time, this can cause the hinges to break and tear, risking damage extending into the painting. So now that you have a better understanding of the art, what exactly is it that a conservator of paintings does at the museum? We can be related to a doctor in that we examine, test, and treat conditions, although our patients are the artwork. We also advocate for the paintings and make sure that they are displayed as safely as possible. One of our most involved treatment processes is the complete remounting of paintings when the structure has become so damaged that it needs to be taken apart and put back together again. So not only do we need an understanding of how these paintings were created, we also need to understand the structure of Japanese mountings and the characteristics of all the individual materials and how they interact. The CMA is one of only 6 institutions in North America who have conservators specializing in Asian paintings conservation. While the CMA's painting collection has long been recognized as one of the most significant collections in North America, it wasn't until the early 2000s that Marcia Steele, then chief conservator, managed to convince the museum of the importance of hiring a conservator devoted to the care of our Asian paintings collection. Due to our work, a dedicated lab space was included when the new conservation suite was completed in 2008. When I arrived in 2011, the studio space was mostly an empty room, although nearly half the space had been taken over by a large stela. Objects conservation was invading. I slowly began creating a functioning studio, adding furniture, tools, and materials as the budget allowed. And in 2014, Ika Zhao was hired on as Chinese paintings conservator. Sorry. As East Asian paintings conservation is a very specialized field, there is actually no training program in North America. My initial training was in Western paper conservation, and I only learned about Japanese paintings conservation because a number of tools and materials used for paper conservation originated in Japan. To specialize, I had to travel to Japan, where I spent years training with experienced conservators, first in Kumamoto, Japan, where I assisted with the reconstruction of Honmaru Goten Palace at Kumamoto Castle, and then at Usami Shokakudo in Kyoto, a studio established in the 1700s. East Asian paintings conservators not only preserve the artwork, but we also preserve the craft of mounting East Asian paintings. While this tradition has been around for hundreds, if not thousands of years, maintaining the skills and training has become increasingly challenging in modern society. While traditional paintings and the materials used in their mountings used to be an everyday part of life in Japan, modern Japanese move more towards Western-inspired architecture, and the traditional painting formats have fallen out of favor. So while conservators specializing in Japanese paintings have always been quite rare in the US, the number of mounters in Japan is also decreasing. There were 3 times fewer mounters registered in 2019 than there were in 2001. While there are government-supported studios that are doing slightly better, they still account for only 12 studios and around 130 employees. This reduction in the number of studios and mounters has led to a decreased demand for the traditional materials and tools required for the conservation of Japanese paintings. These traditional crafts never made a large amount of money, so with the decrease in demand, it is hard for craftspeople to convince their children or younger generations to invest in learning the skills. This means that as craftspeople retire or pass away, there isn't anyone to take their place. Developing and maintaining relationships with these suppliers and craftspeople is very important, not only to support their continued work, but as many will not sell to you unless you have been introduced to them by someone they trust. And once introduced, you must maintain the relationship if you hope to be shown special materials they might have in stock, or to be given the opportunity to custom order materials. The 2 most important materials for the creation of the artwork, paper and silk, are also the 2 most important materials for their mounting as well. Papers are an integral part to mounting paintings as they are used as protective linings that strengthen and support the artwork. While there are many decorative washi makers who have adapted to more modern demands, the traditional papers are becoming harder and harder to source. Shown here are some of the most commonly used papers for Japanese mountings, including Mino paper, which has been inscribed as intangible cultural heritage by UNESCO. Mizu paper is now only made by 1 paper maker, and as the larger studios in Japan who have government support buy up most of the stock, it is very hard to acquire as a conservator working in an American institution. Silks used for Asian paintings conservation are split between painting silk for filling losses and mounting silks for decorative borders. While in the past we could have had an exact match of the silk support woven for patching losses, we now have to choose the closest match from a set list of weaves and age it ourselves using a UV light chamber. This takes a long time, so we've been slowly stocking up on various weaves of painting silk, hoping that we will have the right silk for any future project. As for mounting silks, the Japanese use many different weaves, colors, and patterns, so it is very helpful to have a variety on hand. The studio where I trained had a whole room full of shelves stacked with different mounting silks that had been added to for hundreds of years. But as a very young studio, we have a relatively small collection of silks. There were about 5 different rolls of silks when I started. Silk suppliers are stocking fewer mounting silks, carrying more synthetic textiles, and what gold brocade they do have tends to be fake gold. While it is possible to order silks woven specifically for each project, this takes time and money that are not always available. It is also not always possible to get the desired silk pattern woven, as they may no longer have the pattern cards available, or the modern looms cannot accommodate the size or number of pattern repeats that older looms did. All of this brings us to the Tsuri project and their efforts to make high-resolution facsimiles of important paintings available to the public using a combination of advanced digital photography and printing with traditional gilding and mounting. And I believe at this point, Yoshi has a video that will show you exactly how they create these facsimiles. So the CMA has worked with them twice. First in 2009, when they created a replica of Sesson Shuke's dragon and tiger screens. This was before my time at the museum, so I've only seen photographs of their work. It was then Conservator of Asian Paintings Jennifer Perry, assisted by Barry Austin, one of our experienced art handlers, who managed the careful handling of the original piece. As I mentioned before, the hinges are flexible but fragile, so it was important to be careful while giving the photographers a flat, well-lit surface for their work. You can see the large stela I mentioned draped in plastic just behind the screen. As you can see from the record on the Tsuri website, the replicas of CMA's dragon and tiger screen were donated to the Zen Buddhist temple Sonji. This temple, a branch of the Rinzai school headquarters Daitokuji, is located just to the west of Odawara. Sonji is also the mortuary temple of the Hojo family, who ruled Odawara during Sesson Shuke's lifetime. This image shows the main hall after the completion of restoration work in 2015 by Denshosha, a Japanese architectural firm experienced with the restoration of traditional architecture. According to Sonji legend, Hojo Ujitsune invited Iten Sosei, then 83rd head of Daitokuji in Kyoto, to build Sonji in honor of his father. This legend states that the temple was founded in 1521. Iten Sosei was acting as abbot at Sonji when Sesson painted this portrait. While works by Sesson are rarely dated, there is an inscription at the top of the painting written by Iten that is signed and dated to 1550. As the seals used on this portrait match the seals on the dragon and tiger screens, this can be used as evidence that the dragon and tiger screens were created sometime between 1546 and 1554, placing their creation to a time when Sesson was in Odawara and links the painter to Sonji through Iten Sosei. Research having determined that these paintings were likely painted for the Hojo family and may well have been placed behind rulers of the Hojo family during ceremonies at Sonji Temple, The replicas were donated to the temple in a ceremony in 2010. These images of the dedication ceremony clearly show that temples are not empty gallery spaces, but are active spaces where paintings act as architectural features or are placed for ceremonial purposes. So while these paintings often originally belonged to temples, these spaces are not necessarily ideal for the continued preservation of the artwork. One of the more ongoing concerns from a preservation perspective is that the environmental conditions in temples are not ideal, especially for paintings on paper or silk. There is no temperature or humidity control and very little pest management to ensure the pieces are protected. As I have mentioned before, paper, wood, paste, and silk are very attractive food sources for insects, and so Japanese paintings have often suffered loss from insect grazing. Here is an example of a hanging scroll belonging to a temple in Japan where a great deal of the paper surface has been lost due to insect grazing. Not to mention the wonderful collection of egg sacs laid along the bottom roller. Our dragon and tiger screens were not immune and have themselves suffered insect damage in the past. While older losses have been patched, you can see from this area that there are numerous small holes going through all of the silk paper layers and into the wooden lattice. This has likely occurred after the paintings were conserved sometime in the early 20th century and before it came into the CMA's collection in 1959. You can also see in this detail the numerous small brown dots that are insect frass. Only being in a protected and monitored environment over the last 66 years has kept the paintings safe from further loss. Temples also use the artwork in ceremonies, which often involve the burning of incense. This piece from a temple was so covered in soot that your hands came away black after handling it. Providing replicas is a way of allowing temples to continue to use the images as they were intended without endangering the original piece. The most recent piece to be replicated through the Tsururi project is this pair of nanban screens titled Arrival of the Southern Barbarians. This piece is very different from the dragon and tiger screens and has different condition concerns and brings up another reason replicas can be seen as a useful tool for the preservation of artworks. While dragon and tiger was ink on paper, this pair of screens is painted with heavy applications of mineral pigments. The pigment on this screen has been applied in thick layers, creating a beautiful texture that becomes increasingly fragile as the piece ages. This has already led to loss of pigment throughout the paintings, and some areas, especially the white caps on the waves, continue to be problematic. As this is an ongoing issue, especially reactive to changes in humidity and vibrations, sharing these screens with other institutions becomes challenging and often expensive. From provenance research, it has been determined that this pair of folding screens was at one time in the collection of Nagami Tokutaro, an artist and businessman who published 2 volumes on Nanban art. In 2023, the Nagasaki Prefectural Art Museum held an exhibit on Nagami titled A Romantic Shaft of Light, Nagami Tokutaro and Modern Nagasaki. One of the goals of the exhibit was to reconstitute Nagami's collection and highlight his engagement with the history of Nagasaki. With this in mind, they had hoped to borrow the CMA's screen for the exhibition, but due to numerous reasons, it just was not possible. One of the considerations with these kinds of requests is weighing whether the stress of travel is worth it. To arrive in Nagasaki, the piece would have had to travel on a truck to the airport. Can you say potholes? I don't know what your streets are like, but those potholes in Cleveland could swallow you whole.
Yeah.
The crate would then sit in an unconditioned warehouse that could be as cold as a freezer or as hot as a sauna, before being loaded onto a plane for a flight to Japan. I'm sure you've experienced the fairly constant turbulence of flight these days, so imagine how the screens might feel. It would then be unloaded at the other end and travel to another warehouse before being loaded on a truck for the trip to the museum. Once the exhibition was complete, the screens would have had to go through the same stresses for the return trip. Doing our best to seal the crates and provide cushioning to offset vibrations without applying too much pressure, this travel is risky. Making a replica available allows the paintings to be viewed at other institutions without the increased risk of shipping the originals. In instances where institutions are unable to borrow the original screens, or where the screens would be used more to discuss their social history rather than their art history, a pair of replicas would be a useful alternative. With these considerations in mind, the replicas of our Nanban screens have been donated to the Nagasaki Museum of History and Culture, where they can hopefully be used in future exhibitions on themes relating to the social and cultural significance of Nanban art and the history of Nagasaki. In addition to protecting the original paintings, creating replicas through the Tazuri project helps those crafts that are struggling due to the reduction in demand for traditional art forms. These replicas use gold leaf and employ traditional gilders, as well as traditional mounters. They require all those specialized materials such as paper, silk, lacquer frames, wooden undercores, whose creators have been struggling. This project therefore provides increased support for struggling craftspeople who might otherwise not survive. The CMA has been happy to support the work of the Kyoto Cultural Association through the Tazuri project and hopes that the facsimiles created of paintings from our collection will inspire audiences in Japan and support struggling craftspeople.
And I wanted to finish with a bit of Cleveland Museum of Art, which is an encyclopedic collection that works very hard to connect audiences with art from around the world through exhibitions such as the upcoming Takashi Murakami exhibit, Stepping on the Tail of a Rainbow. Murakami draws on pop culture. Murakami draws on pop culture to make his work more approachable while referencing traditional Japanese art, which will hopefully cause visitors to look more closely at Japanese painting and maybe visit the permanent collections galleries where paintings are rotated every 6 months. I hope you too will look at Japanese paintings more closely and spend some time admiring the artistry that goes into their mountings. Maybe we'll even see you in Cleveland sometime. Thank you very much, and I really